Yeah, my name's Shaun. I've got the first slot after lunch, which is the one where everyone falls asleep. So a word of warning, if you do feel a bit tired, fight it, because I'll come around and jab you with an acupuncture needle if you do nod off. So you've been warned. So who am I? I'm not a regular doctor in that I don't see many patients. I like research. I do a whole heap of things. My day job is I started a company called HoneyLab, and we make medical products out of honey mostly as a skin medicine for conditions such as rosacea and cold sores. But don't get me started on honey. I would talk about it all day. I get so excited by it. And I do all sorts of things, including having a really big interest in natural therapies, both promoting ones I think we should use more that have some good evidence behind them, and also being quite a vocal critic of some of the sillier ones or even the more dangerous ones that are out there. And we'll cover as much as we can in the next 1 hour or so. Because of that, I've become known in the media, and I used to have a regular slot with on breakfast TV with when Paul Henry was on, if you remember those days. He used to quite like me, actually, which is probably a very bad reflection on me. And he's a bit of a character, Paul, and he used to wind me up. And for example, I remember one time, because it was live, of course, and he said, it was counting down, 10, 9, 8, and he said, "Shaun, I'm in a right bad mood today. I'm going to destroy you live in front of the nation." Just like I did John Key half an hour ago. But it was just his humour. It was all fine in the end. So that was good. I did that for a few years. They're all on YouTube if you want to watch any of those, until I got fired, actually. That was quite dramatic. And in fact, I'll tell you at the end of the talk how I got fired. So anyway, I don't come to these events to flog my own products, but I'm here, so I may as well. This is my book on the subject. I'm the author, so I get them cheaper. So if you do want a copy, there's a pile of them with all the leaflets down the right as you leave here. So you can get one of those if you want. And so nomenclature is a little bit complicated, and so what we're talking about mostly is complementary therapies today. So that's when you use natural therapies or products as well as your traditional treatment that you're going to get from your hospital doctors. Alternative is something I don't like. That's when people don't use the regular proven treatments and instead only use these natural ones. The new term is integrative oncology, which I really like, which is using the best of both worlds, which I think we should do. And often you'll see it shortened to CAM, which stands for complementary and alternative medicines. And it's interesting for such a nice, pleasant subject as natural therapies and natural health. You get some really strong opinions. On one side, you have the real advocates of this who think that everything natural is wonderful, and they often hate pharmaceutical products, hate drug companies. They're not all in Nelson, they are in other parts of the country as well. And on the other side, you have the real skeptics, people who just think the whole thing is hogwash. And in fact, quite a bit of the medical profession is still there as well. So you do get some strong opinions. I try and operate where I think everyone should operate, which is in the middle, which is looking at which ones work, which ones don't work, based on the science. In other words, being evidence-based. But I'd say that most people are actually here and needing more information. I think that applies to patients and equally much to health professionals. And that's not being rude to my health professional colleagues. I've trained myself in this. I'm probably one of the only ones who's done so. There isn't a formal training scheme for this. And doctors tell me all the time, and nurses and pharmacists, that they're not trained in this to any large degree as part of their course, yet the patients are asking them all the time. So I think we all need a lot more information. There are hundreds and hundreds of therapies. So obviously, we're not going to cover them all in the next 45 minutes. But here's a good way to think about them. There are 5 different classifications. So the first would be different ways of thinking about health and illness that are different to our Western-trained standard ways, such as Indian or Chinese forms of medicine. The second is where something is physically done to the body, such as massage or chiropractors. The third is when we try and use the power of the mind to help with our health, and there's lots of things that work there. The fourth you'll probably be most familiar with, and this is when you take a diet or a supplement or some sort of pill or drink to try and help your health. And the fourth would be when you try and use some sorts of energies. So that's a good way to think about all these hundreds of therapies. And I do this all the time, and yet almost every talk someone asks me about a therapy I've never even heard of, and I'm sure you're all racking your brains thinking what that could be today. Catch me out. We know a lot about the use of complementary therapies in people with cancer. For example, a quarter who use them, which is most people, will use at least 7. So some people are really committed to using them, and that makes total sense to me. Some people are absolutely committed to doing whatever they possibly can to help with their health. So there's a lot of interest, and I think everyone at least thinks about using complementary therapies, and most people actually do. We know what sort of people use them as well. These are the demographics of people that are more likely to use complementary therapies, higher level education, so a lot of people here, of course. And for me, it's all about the research. Now, and I've got the microphone, and I'm going to be saying this works and this doesn't work, but it's not really my opinion. So this isn't politics. You know, I know we've got an election in a couple of weeks, but this isn't politics where you make a case. Although I'll be saying those things, all I'm trying to do is interpret what the medical research tells us. It's very different to my opinion. And of course, that can change. So I'm, of course, very critical of things like homeopathy. And by the way, if I'm critical of something that you like, don't be offended. Just, if you want to use it, that's fine. But obviously, it doesn't make sense from a science point of view. It's all about the research for me. But something like homeopathy, which I'm a very vocal opponent of, based on the lack of science. But if tomorrow an amazing homeopathy study came out, then I'd be the first to change my mind and say, hey, we should all use it. So it's all about research, and this is one reason I'm so interested in research. If you may not be able to read the numbers, but this is a graph of life expectancy going back around 5,000 years or so. For most of history, we used to die when we were around 25. And then about 200 years ago, you'll notice a little bit of a change. So a child born today has probably got around a 50% chance of living to 100. I think that's quite remarkable. So you would guess that something happened then. So I'll throw it open to the audience. We'll see if you're a chatty lot or not. What happened then? And don't say homeopathy, because that annoys me. Penicillin, no. Everyone says that, but actually penicillin was a little bit later, sort of appearing. Industrial evolution, yeah, that's related. Hospitals, yeah. Sanitary, yeah. Medical training, yeah. Yeah, food. It's all part of the same thing. You're all right. Really what happened then, it was the discovery of the scientific method. I mean, some people would say it's when the churches stopped killing the scientists, but not me, because that would upset a lot of people. But really it was the discovery of the scientific method and its applications through better health, through better sanitation, through better food, through all these things. So obviously you're going to think, well, this scientific method thing must be pretty amazing and incredibly complicated. But actually it's not. It's actually really, really simple. You just have an idea, you do an experiment, and you see what it shows, and then you do more experiments. Science is really, really easy. The gold standard of the way we do trials is really simple. You get a group of people with a condition, half get the treatment, half don't, and you see what happens at the end. Ideally, no one knows who's using what, so you can't be influenced or biased, and we look at the results. And in fact, the first ever clinical trial was on natural products, which is great. So the chap on the left is James Lind. He was a Scottish naval surgeon. And in his time, more people died from scurvy than the battles going on the oceans. And as you can imagine, in these pre-scientific times, there were all sorts of rumours going around about what could prevent this, because it was obviously a horrible and common death. And so what he did was the world's first clinical trial. Now, on the trial, he had 6 groups, and he only had 2 people in each group, which by today's definitions would be quite small for a clinical trial. My cold sores trial at the moment, I've got 950 people on. But he had just 2 in each group. But he managed to work out what was going on. And again, this just shows the power of research. So he tested what people said was causing the deaths. Could prevent the deaths. So he tried things like barley water, cider, I don't think it was that particular brand, vinegar, seawater, sulfuric acid, people said you should drink. And we'll get onto some other crazier things later. And his idea was a couple of oranges and a lemon. And lo and behold, those sailors did really well. The rest didn't or didn't survive. So he was able to work out that there was something in the fresh fruit that did actually prevent scurvy. And he saved hundreds of thousands of lives because of that. Just a little bit of piece of research. There are issues in doing complementary therapy research, for sure, and a lot of people who are strong advocates say, well, you can't do research on my thing. The answer is you can. If with a bit of imagination, you can research anything. There are issues, though. One is the cost of doing it. Who's going to pay for these things? And that's a fair comment. Things like vitamin D, you can't patent vitamin D, so why should you invest all the research money into it? So it is an issue. Ubiquity means that some of these things are everywhere. Again, vitamin D is a good example. It's in our food. We get it. We make it ourselves when we're exposed to sunshine. So if you want to do a trial of something that you're already exposed to, that's pretty hard. And also outcomes. What are the outcomes you're looking for? If people are just generally feeling better, more energy, how do you even measure these in clinical research? And again, if you were thinking laterally, you can do those. But there are issues. But most of the information we get is from stories, isn't it? I mean, everyone in this room will have heard stories, won't they? Or you must try this, and probably from well-meaning people. I heard so-and-so tried something and they did wonderful. But what we have to do is research. And I'll give you an example of why we do research before we get into some of the therapies. Because we can be fooled. So we can have a treatment, and the example I always use is echinacea. So say I've got a stinking cold, and of course you do know that colds are more severe in males than females. That's well proven in research. And so I've got a terrible cold, and I have some echinacea, and I'm better the next day. What am I going to think? The echinacea worked, of course. However, I may be wrong. So why might I be wrong? Well, the placebo effect. So this is really powerful. If you have a treatment and you think it's going to work, you can get better even if there's nothing actually in there. And you may say, well, that's a bit strange and we don't understand it. That's true. But to give you an example, when I was a young asthma researcher, we'd have people blow in a machine, we'd get a result, then we'd give them an inhaler with nothing in there, and we'd say, it's a great inhaler, try this one. And then they blow again, and the result will be 30% bigger. So that's an example, a clear example of the power of the mind over the body, which we're beginning to understand. It's very important. The natural history. So this cold could have been one of those that just disappeared after a few hours. It wasn't going to be a long one anyway. Additional measures. So when we're ill, we don't just do one thing like take echinacea. So, if I've got a terrible cold, I'm going to be off work, I'm going to be moaning, I'm going to have hot baths, I'm going to watch daytime TV, and that'll probably drive me to the whiskey bottle. I've got all these things going on, and maybe some of those are helping as well. Don't forget the last one. So the other thing we need to bear in mind, as well as which things work, is which things are safe. It's the same for any medicine. It's got to be effective and safe. And complementary therapies can harm you in ways you may not even thought about. So sometimes it's obvious. Direct physical harm is obvious. So here on the right we have a collapsed lung, and that's from an over-enthusiastic acupuncturist. So don't let me put you off. That's a rare side effect of acupuncture, but it's obvious. If you can't breathe when he sticks a needle in your chest, that's not good. On the left we have a chemical called amygdalin, and that's a product marketed as called Letrial. If you've heard of Letrial. It was popular in the 70s and 80s in the States. It's making a bit of a comeback now, which is a worry. It's an extract from kernels from apricots and almonds, but it contains another natural product. And if you've read my book, you'll know what else is in there. Cyanide, which is not good. So more insidious, we have indirect harm. So this can be when someone goes down an alternative route first and doesn't use standard treatments at all, or at least delays them. There's been several examples in the press here of people who've had reasonably treatable or conditions with a good chance that treatment could be successful. They've delayed the treatment, and by the time they've presented to health professionals, it's been too late. So that's something we see all the time, unfortunately. Bad advice, and this isn't me speaking for the Doctors' Union. I spent half my life battling with alternative practitioners, and a lot of them do not give good advice on the whole. For example, just about everyone I've come across would be against vaccinations, which are, of course, one of the greatest medical discoveries. Some people, they're not all bad. Some people are very, very good, but there are some very bad ones with no training, giving out poor information. Psychological harm, I'm not a psychologist, but they tell me that people who are positive do better than people who aren't, and we know that in terms of health outcomes. And this is a good book about the subject if you're interested. This was John Diamond, who was married to TV chef Nigella Lawson. He died from throat cancer, but he wrote this book about his experiences with people trying to sell him cures for cancer from the alternative world. It's really interesting. Financial harm, and this could be just wasting $30 on some green-lit muscle extract because TV1 News says it cures cancer, right through to people who go to Mexican cancer clinics and spend $1 million. You know, it can be a waste of time and money. And then just generally, hopefully, so far I've made a case for science. I think science is good. And so I think when we see anti-scientific things, I think it takes us backwards in some ways. And no, you can't buy this with my book. So finally, before we get into some specific ones, as I said right at the beginning, it's about information, and I think it's really hard. That's why I wrote the book. I went to get a book myself. I couldn't find a good book on the subject, so I spent a year of my life putting the book together. I think it's very, very hard. I can tell you that health is the second thing, most common thing that people look up on the internet. So I don't know what number one is. I've got no idea, but I know what number two is. It's health, and it really is the wild west of information. And one of the big problems with it is that at first glance some of the information looks reasonable, and then when you think about it for a while or you do further investigation, it's not. So you just got to be really careful of what you do see on the internet. Books just drive me mad. I can't bear even to go in libraries anymore because you have this alternative section, medicine section, and there's all these crazy books about cancer. I don't know if you've seen them. It's usually some doctor who's gone insane and said that a massive dose of something cures cancer and the government are trying to stop it. And I think it's just awful, and unfortunately that's what most of them. So where do we get information from? Well, we should get it from the medical journals, of course, but you know they're expensive and take a lot of time and quite complicated unless you're trained in those. And there are 10,000 of them every month as well. So you know I read them all, but not everyone is as committed as me. So where do most people go instead? Well, of course they go to the media and particularly the newspapers. So again, if anyone else from Britain, you'll know about the newspapers over there. And basically the way it works is there's many, and the paper you read sort of says a bit about you. So if it's the Daily Mail, it says very bad things in my view, because they only have three stories actually in the Daily Mail. I've worked it out. They have stories about immigrants, house prices, and cancer cures, and that's pretty much it. And they're obsessed by it, and I can prove that. So I'm going to give you some examples of some of the health stories that were in the Daily Mail over just a few months when I did this. And I'm not going to go through them in any sort of detail, but this is what the public are bombarded with all the time. These headlines, you know, they certainly catch your attention, and usually the science behind them is ropey, to say the least. So you can pick your favourite there. Beer for menopause. Yeah, my wife has 10 pints a night, so she's working hard on that, which is probably why she sleeps with a light on, actually, thinking about it. But this is what we're bombarded with, and you just don't know if these are true or not true. And it goes on and on and on. So honey is the answer for everything. I probably agree with that one, actually, but most of them are pretty bad. And these are just some of the things the Daily Mail has said cause cancer over the years, and almost every day you see a new one. So pick your favourite, and all I would say is if this was true, I'm not saying it's true, if it was true, then I guess some are more worth the risk than others. Meaning Pringles, of course. So and this is from Private Eye in the UK, but for me this is how it feels when the public are looking at health information. For example, one day coffee cures diabetes, the next day coffee gives you diabetes. Chocolate's good for you one day, it's bad for you the next day. I've even seen in the Herald on different pages exactly the opposite stories. So it's very, very confusing. And With that in mind, I'll cut to the chase and I'll talk about what I think works. Now, what I mean by works is I'm not talking about cures for cancer. What I'm talking about is therapies that may help with symptoms, with quality of life, with that sort of thing. And what I like about these is there's all sorts of things I'm going to very, very briefly show you. We haven't got time for details, but there's things for everyone. You know, you might want to try multiple things or just one thing or none of them. You might want to pop a pill. You might want to do something more spiritual or something more physical. There's all sorts of things. So very, very briefly, and I'll break them down by the 5 sections we looked at before. In terms of alternative systems, acupuncture is something I'm really not sure about. Normally, we don't have enough research to make an informed opinion. The thing with acupuncture is there's been a ton of research, there's thousands of studies, and we still don't know. The better the study is, the worse it seems to perform. Certainly the theory that the needles are put into energy lines, the chi lines in the body, and they influence health, that's been proven not to be true, because you get the same effect if the needles are in the energy lines or elsewhere. I think, but having said that, at the very, very least, it's a really, really good placebo. We've talked about how important the placebo effect is, and anything that's weird and exotic and strange, and of course putting lots of needles into your skin is strange, has a better placebo effect. So it's generally very safe. I know a lot of physios use it, for example, with sore knees, and it's really one I would say, as well as other ones, if you want to give it a go, give it a go. And if you think it benefits you, it benefits you. The science behind it is certainly debatable. Moving on to more physical things, this one is massage, and again, probably some of you have been referred. And I've been doing this for about 10 years now, and 10 years ago, no one had even heard of this, whereas now a lot of the cancer centres are now referring people for massage because you can get real medical benefits, even if it's just stress reduction. Some of these things are probably working by just reducing stress, but I think that's a really important thing. You know, stress is hugely negative for our health. And then moving on to the more mind-based ones, something I was certainly sceptical about before I read the research was aromatherapy. Very, very safe, but of course probably working by intense relaxation, and that's a good thing. Meditation, I think there's a session, actually a concurrent session, and one later on mindfulness meditation, and one of the popular forms of it, and it can be very good for some people for all sorts of symptoms. Then we get the expressive art therapies, again, something I would have been very skeptical of, things like art therapy or music therapy. And you may say to me, well, how the heck can those help a person's health? And the answer is I don't know, actually. And sometimes we don't know the mechanisms. There's some really good research showing that it can help a lot of people, though, which is important. It could be as simple as taking your mind off the condition for a while. It could be as simple as going out and doing a social activity. Who knows? But, you know, some people get some quality of life improvements with things like this. Biofeedback is something that used to be common. I think it'll make a comeback with smartphones, and that's where you get hooked up to a laptop and you can see your breathing rate, your heart rate, your blood pressure on a screen, and then you learn relaxation techniques, and you can learn them well, and you can see those things come down on the screen as you actually do these techniques. And then after a few sessions, you don't need to be hooked up, you can just learn them. So it's a way of learning deep relaxation. Hypnosis is something we know very little about. We're probably familiar with it working for things like phobias in some people or stopping smoking in some people. My favourite complementary therapy study ever was actually for hypnosis, and this was in children with leukemia, actually, I think it was, and they had repeated bone marrow aspirations, which I understand is a very painful procedure. And what they did in the study was hypnosis around the time of the procedure. And what that meant is that the children didn't spend the next few weeks worrying about the procedure coming up. They forgot about it. Didn't make it less painful at the time, but for the children, having the thought of those big needles coming on a regular basis was horrendous. And anything to help with that is good. Yoga, which is, I keep recommending, I should try it myself sometime, but a combination of exercise and meditation and increasing in popularity. Loads of good studies, particularly for ladies with breast cancer. And an Eastern variation called Tai Chi. You can actually have that on ACC now. And then we get on to the ones that you physically use or take. And yes, I will mention honey briefly because it is my day job. I get very excited. In terms of eating honey, the main benefit is for cough. So you know the tickly cough that you get, that you just can't stop coughing at night? There have been some great studies showing that honey half an hour before bedtime helps with that. Probably just lining the nerve endings of the throat. And the good news is you can use any old honey. You don't need expensive honey, whatever you have at home. In terms of using it for the skin, it's an amazing product for skin diseases. It kills all bacteria, reduces inflammation, and heals wounds. So that's a lot of diseases of the skin. I did a TED talk on this if you want to learn more about it. The key thing for using on the skin, though, is to use medical honey, not the stuff that's in your cupboard. That literally contains bits of hive and bits of dead bees and bees' knees, which is fine to eat, don't let me put you off, but it's not good to put that on your skin. Whereas medical honey is sterilized and is suitable for the skin. Capsaicin is the active ingredient from chili peppers. I don't know, and that's available in a cream, and it's really good for certain types of pain, particularly knee arthritis and that sort of thing. If you want to try that, just ask any pharmacist for the chili pepper cream. They'll know exactly what you're talking about. Ginger is one I love because it's an example of really an old wives' tale, a traditional treatment, and then there's been some really robust science, and it's proven that it works, which is fantastic. The main study was from America, 600 people, and they compared it to the strongest anti-nausea injections for people having chemotherapy, and the ginger was just as good, and of course a lot safer. The key is to get the right dose, and that's the same for everything, whether it's standard or natural. And they worked out the dose in this study. It's 0.5 gram a day, which is about 1/4 teaspoon. If you get too much, say 3 grams a day, you can actually get side effects of increased bleeding. So because of that, I'm recommending it. I actually did put a product together. I worked with the Cancer Society and the Breast Cancer Society to put a product out. So this is, you'll see this in some of the pharmacies, and it's a honey-based ginger, but it gives the correct amount of ginger that's shown in this study, and it looks quite cool, and it tastes amazing. It's like a dessert. It's beautiful. So this one is called black cohosh, this white plant, and that can be useful for all sorts of hormonal symptoms, either from cancers or some of the treatments from them as well. This one is the most widely studied herb. This is St. John's wort and has some great evidence for depression. Probably as good as antidepressant medications, but probably with a fewer side effects. Certainly in places like Germany, this is what they would use and not antidepressants. But you have to take these things seriously. So, for example, this one, it does interact with a lot of medications as well. So you do have to treat these seriously. If anything can have a positive reaction, it can also have negative reactions or interactions as well. This one got me through medical school finals. This is valerian, which is a really nice sedative. But again, it works, but take it seriously. Don't drive, don't operate machinery, don't have any alcohol with it. This one, anyone recognize this one? Again, I could give a whole lecture. We don't have time. This is probably a waste of time. Let's do it anyway. Does anyone not support legalizing marijuana for medical use? Thought so. So 94% is what the general public are saying. We may have a change in policy in 2 weeks if we have a new government. There's a very clear difference between the two parties on this one. So we'll see. And I'll make a little announcement if you can keep a secret. No one can keep a secret. So last week I got a license to do medical marijuana research, the first one in the country. And we've got a team together and we're starting those trials this year. It'll take around 3 years. We're going to be working on a capsule. We're going to develop it like you would any pharmaceutical. So it's going to be a consistent product, hopefully available on Pharmac. And so that's exciting because I've been a strong proponent of the medical use of marijuana for a long time. I do so many of these talks, so many people are using it, which is fine, and you know, the report it works, but I think it'd be better if we had a consistent product, not something you've bought from someone down the pub, you know, and you don't know what's in there. And that's fine, but I think we can do better than that. Good, particularly for the nausea and vomiting, for pain, it can help potentially psychologically. And I really like the appetite stimulation that can occur from it as well, as to compared with something like steroids. But there are negatives as well. There's always negatives. What are the negatives? Well, obviously in young people, a lot of marijuana can maybe cause psychological problems, and it can cause cancer as well. If you smoke a lot of marijuana, it can cause lung cancer, it can cause emphysema. So pros and cons. I probably don't have time to discuss it more. And then energies. Again, another example of something I really like. This is a TENS machine, transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. Anyone use one of these? Yeah, and again, when they first came out, these were seen as crazy alternative treatments, and now it's standard practice. Just about every woman in labour would have one. Physios use them on everyone for pain, and it works. You get these little electrical, pleasant, tingling pulses, and they can basically block the nerve fibres. So a great example of something that's been well studied and becomes part of mainstream medicine, which is the way it should do. So what doesn't work? Before we open the floor for questions, there's always questions. I'll just show you some of the highlights, or maybe I should say lowlights, of some of the ones that are out there that are either don't work or dangerous. Don't be offended if you use these, just keep quiet. And I'll just start with this one. Ear candling. Yeah, millions of ear candles are sold every year, and it's ridiculous because they're supposed to, firstly, clear out the earwax, and it's the opposite. Wax goes in, and also apparently it's really relaxing, but there's many problems. First of all, as you can see from the picture, the melted wax can actually drip straight onto the eardrum, which ENT surgeons see a lot of. And as you can see, this lady's asleep. There were reports of people falling asleep with these and waking up with the house on fire. So beware of ear candles. Colonic irrigation. I mean, I see these in every town I go to, even small towns I drive around, I see people offering colonic irrigation. I mean, this is medieval medicine where our bowels we need to be cleansed, and it's ridiculous. I don't like to even think about what occurs in these rooms where up to 90 gallons of fluid are pumped in and out of someone's, these tubes and into people's colons. Very, very dangerous. You can rupture your colon, and there's no way back from that. It can also give you a heart attack as well from upsetting your electrolyte and fluid balances. So potentially dangerous, no proven benefits at all. People use all sorts of things, obviously water, enzymes, coffee. You've heard of coffee enemas? What a waste of coffee. And I always assumed when I'd heard about coffee enemas that it was cold coffee, but not necessarily. So this was in a surgical journal a couple of years ago. Someone who had a perforated rectum from a hot coffee enema. So you can just see where it is there. So that's very bad. And the authors concluded with words I never thought I would see in the English language. Just make sure the coffee is cool before use. So unfortunately, you'll be thinking about that for the rest of the day. I'm sorry about that. So, and of course, a lot of this is celebrity-driven. So here we have Professor Gwyneth Paltrow, world-famous medical researcher. And like a lot of celebrities, she's appeared with these big things on her back. Do you know what those are? Yeah. This is what it looks like when you have it done. That's the good version. The one that Sonny Bill Williams does, and I won't argue with him actually, if he says it works, it works. But the one he does is where he puts little cuts in them as well, and so obviously loads of blood comes out, what you call hijami cupping, and no proven benefits, obviously, although it does make me laugh. Most of the complementary therapies are actually well-meaning in my view. Even the homeopaths who I battle all the time, I think they're generally lovely, well-meaning people. I think they're just wrong, and that's fine. But there are some scam artists out there. This is an example of the true scam artists. These are what you call psychic surgeons. Have you heard about these people? And it's a magician's trick. So they pretend that they're reaching into your body to grab the cancer, and they have little bits of chicken entrails in their fingers, and they'll burst it at the right time. There'll be blood and gore everywhere, and it's all, and it can fool people. And, some people are desperate. I never, ever blame a patient for trying things. I understand why people might want to try anything, but these are real scam artists, particularly in South America, but you get them over here as well sometimes. We talked about amygdalin before. I don't have time to go into any great detail on vitamin C. It's a very, very simple, short answer. There's no studies showing that it helps, and there's plenty of evidence that it could harm. So I'm strongly against it. I've debated people on the TV. I've been to the conference of the doctors and nurses who give this. There's about 100 of them in the country. And it gets me angry because if they actually got together and collected all the data from all the injections they're giving, that we'd probably have the answer. So there's a few animal studies. There's been 2 proper human studies done by the Mayo Clinic a few years ago. They were totally negative. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they do more studies and they show it works. But at the moment, I don't recommend it because it can harm and hasn't been shown to be effective at all in humans. Diets, there's so many crazy diets out there. It's really simple. I don't recommend any strange diets. They're always involved either massive amounts of something or missing whole food groups out. And any nutritionist will tell you that's not a good thing to do. You've got to eat sensibly. You've got to have all parts of a balanced diet. Miracle mineral solution. Anyone come across this one? This is a bleach type substance. It was around a few years, and things like this often keep popping up. So this was around a few years ago, and then MedSafe banned it, and then it made an appearance last year in this format, which is the magic bleach water from Waikato that Colin Meads used. Did you see this story? And again, MedSafe are trying to ban it, and it'll reappear in another format, I've got no doubt. It's just bleach. It's actually often the same bleach that you use to clean swimming pools. Pretty strong stuff. And the directions are to increase the dose until you vomit and then to cut the dose back again. You don't need me to tell you that drinking bleach is not going to help cure cancer, and it is dangerous. And to finish with, magnetic therapies. Again, no offense to anyone who believes in the use of magnetic therapies, but they don't do anything, whether it's insoles in your shoes or blankets or bracelets, whatever people use. And this has actually led to my demise on TV. I said I was going to tell you about that. So it was my last show, and I was quite pleased with myself because I was making jokes about them. So, I said that the iron in the blood does not respond to the magnets. It's a different type of iron. So that's how it's supposed to work, and it can't work. And I said I can prove it because an MRI scanner is one massive magnet. And so if our blood did respond to magnets, we'd explode in MRI scanners, and we don't. So we know it can't work. So I was pretty pleased. And afterwards they said, Shaun, that was great, controversial, what we wanted, but you're fired. And I asked them why, and they said, well, do you not watch the show? And I said, well, no, actually, I don't. And they said, well, if you did watch the show, you'd know we were sponsored by MagnaSleep. So that was the end of me. So thanks very much. I hope that was of interest.